Canada, and the US.
Wow.
I'm a little bit overwhelmed by that. But certain people came to see me in the hospital, and I'm very grateful for that. I received a thing from Dr. Nigro, my psychiatrist friend in Cleveland, Ohio. It was about that high. It was a food, fruit, flowers, and goodness knows what. And of course, Sam said to me on the phone, he said, you know, this always puts you in good with the aides in the hospital, and the nurses, and it did. They were very hungry about that. So I'm very grateful for all the good wishes and the help that I received while in the hospital. Believe me, it was very much needed. As you know, I think I told you the nurses thought I wasn't going to make it. So this left its effects on me, unfortunately. But we'll get over that. Tonight, one of our students is driving to Notre Dame, prepared to go to prison. Brian Kinzier. And I sent with him this poster, as it were, to give to whoever is in authority there. It'll possibly go to the media and to the university, but I'll see that it goes to the university, of course. I'll read it to you. Faculty and students of the Aquinas School of Philosophy deplore the scandal brought onto the Catholic Church, all Christian believers, and the pro-life movement by the approval and honour shown to President Obama and his defence of abortion. The outrageous treatment of protesters is deplorable. So I took the liberty of sending that in yours and my name. And I think you'll find that somebody will grab hold of that. I told Patrick, at least to Brian, to take a few copies with him, that I'm sure he will need them. But I had a list of things, but I must have left it at home. List of things to say. Well, let me say this. The priest said to the car mechanic, who had presented him with a steep bill, he said, please, I'm just a poor preacher. And the mechanic says, I know, I'm one of your parishioners. I like that one. So, oh no, they're both here. There we are, that's right. Notice the way we've established the nature of man. First, we compared him, what he's got in common with the rocks, the water, the minerals all around the world. What he's got in common with them is that dualistic teaching, namely hylomorphism, matter and form. I don't know whether I've ever explained the word hylomorphism to you. It comes from, well, I won't write in Greek. That doesn't work. Try this one. Got others in my briefcase. Yes. Hule, there's no Y in Greek. Hule means matter. Morph means shape. Hylomorphism. It means matter and form. It's given more of a meaning of form than just shape. So it's called the hylomorphism of, that's the theory of hylomorphism, namely that there's matter and form makes up all bodily things. Note, all bodily things, matter and form. Form makes a thing be what it is. Matter multiplies it. There's not just one dog, there are many dogs. Doggy form makes it be a dog. And matter multiplies that form. I mean, whiteness is one thing, but the paper multiplies it. So there's either substantial form or 9 accidental forms. Well, we'll talk about accidental forms here. The colour. That's something that belongs to a substance. So, right at the beginning of things, man is compared to all those things that are non-living. Then he can be compared to plants. And he's got something in common with plants. So that man participates in all of reality through his very being. He's got in common with plants that they have a vegetative soul, but he has vegetative powers in his one soul. So Thomas deals very strictly with that there's only one soul, not three souls as some people thought. Some people thought they had a vegetative soul, a sensitive soul, and a rational soul. No, man has one soul that is so perfect that it has the powers of all the lower things. So, first of all, as they say in French, merci buckets.
Yes.
So, he has this in common with non-living things, matter and form. He's got this in common with plant life, vegetative soul. So he has a vegetative soul. And this is the theory of hylomorphism. Hylomorphism is extremely important. It means morph, that's the form. Hule in Greek means the matter. So all things, bodily things, are made up of matter and form. Form tells us what the thing is and makes it be what it is. Matter multiplies. So we've got this in common with plant life, as I said, that we don't have a limited soul like they have, or a limited form. We'll call it form for the moment. But in living things, form is called, the substantial form, the form that makes it be the substance it is called soul. Call it what you like, it doesn't matter. It's like that professor of biology who said it's a biogenic principle. He was pulling the wool over his own eyes. I don't care what you call it, as long as you recognise that it's the specific form of plant life. Others have given it other kinds of names. About half a dozen different names have been given. So we've got that in common with plants, that we have vegetative life as well as plants do. Then we go to animals, brute animals. And we've got sensitive life, just like they have. We have sensitive powers, all not only nutrition, growth, and generation like the plants, but the lowest of all animal life, perhaps oysters. What does my mother used to say about the oyster? Was a noisy oyster, used to stamp its feet on the ocean all the time. Well, that noisy, well, I thought it was funny anyway. Noisy oyster. So the oyster has perhaps touch. They certainly respond to touch. If you've ever played with sea anemones and things like that, like I have on the coast, it's the trouble, you people are landlocked here, but if you live on the coast, you see rock pools and you see all sorts of things. Like the soldier in Australia who saw the little starfish, beautiful little starfish in his hand. And he said, "Oh, the beastly thing bit me." 1 minute later, he was dead. The blue-ringed, not starfish, I'm sorry, octopus. Blue-ringed octopus. The rings glower. I've never seen one, but they glower when they get upset at all, and have a little barb that gets down into the hand, and of course, deadly poison. So, I have a teacher's journal, a magazine somewhere, that they're warning teachers that don't let children play with the blue-ringed octopus. We have a number of things like that in Australia. On the Great Barrier Reef, there are the stonefish, for instance. Tread on it and you'll be dead too. In any case, we've got in common with all of those things certain powers. Now, there is a greater gradation amongst sensitive life. There may be only touch. There may be any one of the, say, a couple. Touch is the basic one, of course, and same as it is with man. Touch, taste, smell, hearing, and sight. And amongst higher things, of course, they'll have all of those, but amongst the lower things, they may have some of those. Taste and touch, I would think, would be the lowest that animals could have. So we participate in animal life with that. we've got that in common with them. Then higher animals have internal senses, not only the external senses, which are 5 or 6, depending which way you look at them, because touch sometimes is divided into 2, and rightly so, but the internal senses, sense consciousness, and its storehouse, the imagination. And then the higher sense, the estimative sense in the animals, or cogitative sense in man, and its storehouse, sensitive memory. We've got that in common with the higher animals. But then man has something higher still. He's got intellective soul, intellective powers, such as the intellect, the rational powers, intellect and will. So man has the higher powers. So he stands out alone. So that, who was it? Was it J.B.S. Haldane, I think it was, a famous professor who was fond of saying things that often were very silly. And he, like a lot of scientists, especially a lot of physicians, like the physician who told me he'd operated on many, many people, he'd never found a soul yet. And I said, I'd be damn surprised if you claimed that you did find a soul. So he, with all of these things, man is risen above all the other animals. And like I think J.B.S. Haldane said, man is just a silly, insignificant thing. Fancy saying a God came down to look after him, etc., etc. Well, it just so happens that one little child, like the one that just came in, is greater than the whole universe. When you've got your sense of values sorted out, that's the way you see it. That child depends on your sense of values. If you go on quantity, well, that's a silly way to go about things. That's carrying mathematics just a little bit far. So when you understand the real substantial value of a human person, they're greater than the whole universe of beings, superior. Even if there's a big bang out there, stars, etc., etc., they're nothing compared with one little child. And I was talking to somebody only in the last few days, and I can't remember who it was now, that the zygote in the infant, oh yes, Dr. Shea in Buffalo, he's a physician writing a lot on medical ethics. And John was speaking about the zygote, the one cell, which is equal to any big person in this room, one tiny cell. He said they're finding out so much about it. I remember when I was studying biology, we used to think of it about having a vacuole, having a nucleus and the various ectoplasm, etc., etc. He said finding out now it's so complex, it's almost beyond our understanding. There's so much contained in that little thing. Well, I always suspected that there's far more than we realise, because it has everything which is a prerequisite to the formation of this woman, this gentleman. It has everything crammed into that one tiny cell that you can't see except with a microscope. So man is indeed higher than that. But we go on further in philosophy. We prove that man has a spiritual form. His form, or soul, which the living form, or soul, that he has, is spiritual. That means it's utterly immaterial. We prove that several ways. Utterly immaterial, which makes it greater than the whole universe. There's one man wrote a book, I think the title is, I've got it somewhere, A Little Less Than the Angels. Now, let's go above man. He's got something in common with the angels. Now, philosophically, we cannot prove that angels exist, as I've mentioned before. We can prove with utter certitude that God exists, but not angels. But remember, the ancient Greeks and the Romans thought that angels existed. They didn't need convincing. If you talk about it now, oh, that's Christian talk. What about the ancients, the pagans? They called them the intelligences. They even spoke about there being 48 necessary to control the universe. Very strange. But they didn't need to be convinced that there were angels existing. But to my mind, metaphysically, we can show that it's absurd to suppose there aren't any angels. Because why, having already proved that God exists and everything is dependent upon him, why we've got minerals, plants, brutes, man, and then God, a tremendous difference, tremendous distance. Granted that why did he bother creating all this? To manifest his own perfection and to share it with others. Well, why would he go so low down in the scale but ignore what goes between? To me, it doesn't make sense. So I think you have to see something like that, as the Greeks saw it. You have to admit the existence of angels just from pure reason, that they ought to exist if they didn't. It would be a defect in his creative order if he did not create them. So we share that universe with the angels. We share that universe with our spiritual souls. So that perfection doesn't escape us. Now, not only that, the spiritual soul has a property, immortality. Since spirituality means utter simplicity and not a composite thing, except it's composite in this manner, it has its very nature, its essence, and it has its be. Because it doesn't be, the be is not in its nature. It has to come into be. So, on that account, not having any parts to disintegrate, like matter and form, and what is it that causes them to disintegrate? What's the convertible cause of death amongst all bodily things? One thing. It's not a dagger, it's not poison, it's not falling off a cliff, it's the appetite of the matter for other forms, that other forms befit that matter, or matter can seek other forms. That's the convertible cause of death. Without it, you don't have death. So, but since there's no matter in the soul, though people like St. Bonaventure and a few others thought there was a spiritualized matter in the soul, on account of there being no matter, therefore it's immortal. It cannot from itself die. It survives after death. And it's a strange thing, but native peoples throughout the world, those headhunters in New Guinea and other places, and the Australian Aborigines, they all thought that there is life after death. It seemed to them that it was a part of their very existence. There's a tremendous appetite, and that appetite wouldn't be fruitless, is probably the way they think. That there must be some life after death. I have a picture in Colin Simpson's book, I think it's called Plumes and Arrows on New Guinea, and one of my friends up there, Monsignor Anselm, tells me it's a very authoritative book on New Guinea. It tells some funny stories. He's out in a valley all by himself, and he's designing circuits for radio work. He said, could you imagine? He said, I worked all these years with the Australian, the Communications Board or something, and here I am out in the wilderness, he said, with black kids playing around, playing soccer all around me, he said, and yelling out in another language, and yet here I am designing circuits. He told me two things. One, a boy caught his foot on a sliver of bamboo and split his foot open. And he stitched it up, because these missionaries are trained in this kind of thing before they go away there. He stitched it up, and then he said he looked up, and there's the boy playing soccer again. He said a white boy would be, oh, my foot, I've got a sore foot, I can't play. He said, here's this one of the cuckoo tribes. Drive your cuckoo, tried to save that. Anyway, they're all there playing soccer and went straight back into playing soccer again. The other point he told me, by the way, which is very strange in the animal world, very many things. I think I mentioned this once before to you. He was working on a little engine which he had for his refrigerator, and something came off it or something or other, and he was fixing it, and he detected a movement out of the corner of his eye, and he looked up, and there's this snake about 6 or 7 feet long going around the the board, the top of the cabin that he has there. And he saw this there, and he has some steel wire. My father had this steel wire. I often wish I had a piece of it. Very useful thing. And he kept it there for this very sort of thing. And he just went and whipped its head off. And the body just went round straight, round there, and then out the window.
He forgot his head.
He lost his head.
Lost his head, yeah. That's like they say about the, what was it, the dinosaur had a brain at both ends. One end had argued a priori, the other end had argued a posteriori. So they had two, because the whole thing is, remember the spinal cord is really a continuation of the brain. And of course, with a snake, that's the thing too, it goes right along there. I remember killing a deadly snake, the brown snake on one occasion that nearly bit me. I remember killing that by hitting it just behind the head, about that far behind the head with a stick. But the mouth still tried to grab the stick, even though the thing was in the death throes, still tried to bite it. Though they don't bite, usually they poke, they strike. That's how they always inject a snake, poison snakes. So we have a saying, if you see 2 holes in your skin, you better start working on it. If you have a sort of a roundness of holes where teeth have bitten you, don't worry about it. Just clean it up. Well, I shouldn't say don't worry about it, you're not going to die. It's not poisonous, in other words, but if you've just got 2 puncture marks, that means it's deadly. So we've got that in common with the angels. We've got the spiritual soul. And we're risen enormously above the whole universe. And why is that little girl, she looked around to see who I'm referring to, that little girl is so far above the universe, yet she's limited in her thinking, very limited. It's because the organs are not yet sufficiently developed. The soul is there. If that soul were liberated from that body, it would have a magnificent time. It could deliberate very, very magnificently about lots of things. But because of the limitation of the organs, it cannot function adequately, because our soul is one that's meant to be in a body, and that is why there will be the general resurrection to come after death. That's theological teaching, that's not philosophical teaching, of course. So, don't be like the person. We can deduce all this. This all came from what we studied when we studied the immateriality of the soul. Don't be like the woman on, what was it? Forgotten the station it was. Tom Bowley was there at that time one night, and she said, no one comes after death because nobody's ever come back. We don't know what's there. I pushed the microphone away, took the headphones off, and I just went like that. Tom Bowley said, he described the whole scene. He said, Dr. Waters has taken the headphones off and he's put his hands in the air and I'm sure he's got something to say. And I said, too right I have. Put them all back and the microphone, etc. And I said, we do know what comes after. Immediately after death is that personal judgment. We see ourselves like we've never seen ourselves. Now it's difficult to reflect, for the intellect to reflect over the soul. Why? Because of the impediment of matter which is present. But take that matter away and we'll know instantly all about our own passions, our anxieties, our desires, our foolishness, our brilliance, etc., etc. We'll know all about it. Each one of us will know that. There'll be a personal judgment of ourselves. Say, what a bar steward I was to do this or that, or something like that. But we'll know. I said bar steward. So the question is, we'll know, just like the angelic beings do, exactly what we are and who we are. We'll know what we're capable of, etc. And maybe we won't be too hard on ourselves. But my friends, in all of this work, what I've said before, method is important. We used the method as we went along. And I hope you haven't forgotten it in spite of my impediment of being in hospital. I hope you haven't forgotten everything that I taught. But method is important. In other words, a principle of reason, and a fact, and for those plus the fact, we give a conclusion. And the conclusion explains the causes of the fact. That's what the conclusion explains. If we were conducting a biological course, we would have observation here. The principles of observation. But since we're in philosophy, we've got principles of reason. The philosopher is above all a guardian of the principles of reason. So try and know those principles. You've got 2 pages of them I gave you. Principles of reason. Don't have to learn them off by heart. They'll just come automatically if you just familiarize yourself with them. But that's the method. And sometimes you'll see it in various philosophers. You see Aristotle or St. Thomas might say, everything operates according to its nature. Well, do you remember how we simplified that? Do follows be. Things do according to what they be. Cat behaves like a cat, a dog behaves like a dog, a tree behaves like a tree. Do follows be. That's a fundamental principle. Father Woodbury boiled it down, all principles, to 6 basic principles on one occasion. And they're the first 6 you've got in that list, if I remember correctly. Those 6 fundamental principles. They're the most important. So one of them is things operate for the sake of an end. Another is do follows be. And of course, they're all really manifestations of the supreme principle. Nothing can be and not be at the same time under the same respect. They're the first 3 principles in your list. The first one says it one way, positive way. Next one says the same principle in a negative way, and the other one says it in a middle way. Between be and be not, there's no middle. The principle of excluded middle. So look at those principles and think about them. Just reflect over them. But those principles are the light of the intellect. The intellect operates according to the illumination of the principles, just as sight operates according to the illumination of, say, colour. Vision. Vision operates because of the illumination of colour. Somebody said, if they're, for instance, in a forest, if a tree falls and there's nobody there, does it make a sound? Well, yes, of course, we showed that. Like somebody else said, if a man is talking to himself in a forest, is he still wrong?
With no woman to hear him.
With no woman to hear him, that's right. Is he still wrong? So the method is important in every science. One professor of science wrote that there's no such thing as scientific method, he said. That everything requires a different method. Well, in a certain way, he's right. But it all boils down to say that it boils down to this, that observation is the method for the empirical sciences. So, my friends, we've seen these comparisons of how things develop. They're all developed in conjunction with the world around us. We have to have matter and form to be in touch with all the world around us, with all the other things that are matter and form. But we're the masters. That's why I do believe somewhere in the good book of books it says, go forth and dominate. Not the exact words, but go forth and tame the rest of reality. And man's doing that with the biological sciences, chemistry, physics, and astrophysics, etc. These are all good things. Man is gradually unfolding his understanding of the universe.
So our intelligence is not all contained within our brain, but it develops because of our senses, is that right?
It doesn't develop because of our senses. No, I wouldn't say that.
Maybe your understanding does.
The understanding does, yes. The senses help understanding. That's adding to to the soul, as it were, the intellect. See, understand, we have the basic form is called soul, but it has all these powers. They're powers of operation of that soul. They're not the soul itself. The intellect's not the soul, though sometimes philosophers speak that way. But what they mean is the intellectual operation is one of the functions of the soul, the rational soul. Sight is one of the functions of the rational soul. Some powers need organs, like sight, but the intellect doesn't need organs to exist, nor does it need organs to operate, but it needs organs to operate on. So they supply it with its knowledges. Just as sight, for instance, needs an organ to exist in, and it needs an organ to operate. But it needs matter, or an organ if you like, to operate on. So all of this is a perfection in a certain way. I think, if you don't mind, we'll take a quick break. So, my friends, we spoke about the spirituality of the intellect. Are we all right on tape? Still going, is it? The spirituality of the intellect. And a property of that is, oh, you're not on air now? Is the freedom of the will. As a result of that spiritual intellect, we have freedom of the will. Freedom is brought about, you might remember, by two things. One, on our part, the spirituality of the intellect allows us to be free. Two, the limitation of things around us. If there was no limitation of things around us, we wouldn't be free. If things around us were perfect, utterly perfect, you wouldn't be free. You couldn't reject it. But the fact is, I can have this ice cream, but the ice cream isn't as good as the car. Or like Joe says, he says, Dad, if I had a car, I could be much better off in college if I had that car. So Dad gives him a car. Then he starts to whine because he wants gas. He found the car's useless without gas. Then everything's limited around us in goodness and desirability. So then he wants to go somewhere. Then he wants Fifi to go with him. So what does he do? He drives down the lake.
That's the end of the story.
No, it isn't. And he says, you want to sit in the back? And she says, no, I want to stay here in the front with you. Then he says, do you want to go a bit further? She said, yes, and he drove into the lake. So the spirituality of the intellect, from that we know that we have a spiritual soul. Because when we say spirituality of the intellect, in a way we should be saying spirituality of the soul. And St. Thomas frequently speaks like that. The soul, he'll say, not the intellect. Because the intellect is one of the faculties of activity, one of the faculties of operation of the soul. And we know also the spirituality of the soul, on account of that, it's immortal. It's not composed of parts to go wrong. Now, because of that spirituality in society, it makes a big difference. Man is not just another animal, he's raised above that. So man has a code of ethics. He knows there are things that he could do, like dogs in the street, but he knows that he ought to do some things and ought not to do others. I was in an airport, I can't remember where it was, out in the Midwest somewhere, and a security officer came up to me and he said something about, are you advertising? He said, or are you just showing off? I said, what are you talking about? He said, I had a $5 bill sticking up out of my pocket here. I didn't realise I had it there. So he said, you better put that $5 bill away. You might be picking somebody up you don't want to pick up, he said. So man knows that there are ways he ought to operate ought, ought, ought. He knows the oughty, so he won't be naughty. That's individual. Individuals have a mode of behavior, a code of ethics. Most people would regard code of ethics as something we ought not to do to harm others. Just simply that. But what if there aren't any others? Ought I behave in certain ways if there are no others around? You can do what you like? No, I ought to feed myself properly. I ought to look after my body and make sure that I'm rested, etc., etc. But then, not only because of that spirituality and the code of ethics, we have a family code of ethics, how man ought to behave in society. And then in civil society, in the family, in civil society, there's a code of ethics too. But tonight I want to say just a little word or two about that with respect to society. And remember, the code of ethics we have is not just yours or mine or somebody else's. Like a student said to me once, I thought everybody had to have their own ethics, their own philosophy. Well, that's partly true. He said, well, why the hell do I have to listen to yours? Just shows you how cheeky students can get at times. I nearly said, because I'm bigger than you. I refrained from saying it, of course. So it's not just your ethics and my ethics, as you hear occasionally on the what Boris Sokolov called the pseudo-intellectuals, radio announcers. Boy, did I draw fire in Ottawa when I said that, something like that one day. Woman sitting in there, her husband was one of the leading announcers on the radio station there, and she objected to me saying that, pseudo-intellectuals. I said, I didn't say it, Sokolov did. In his book, The Permissive Society, he said, for instance, that Freudianism didn't catch on anywhere in the world like it did in the United States. He said Freud was considered a fraud in lots of places, or a fashionable thing, but it caught on in the United States, mainly caused by pseudo-intellectuals. And he made remarks about what pseudo-intellectuals were: radio announcers, school teachers, etc. He said it, I didn't say it. So, now on account of this spirituality, it has a big effect in civil society. Man is an individual, but he's not only an individual, but a person. And that's not the same thing. Founded upon the material body, he's an individual. Founded upon the soul, the spiritual soul, he's a person. So there's a vast difference between personality and individuality. Hitler was a great individual. Adolf Hitler. You're all too young to know that. You young people don't know about those things, but I can remember hearing Adolf Hitler. Wenn Sie wach in die Deutschlander, etc. Great individual. The great persons would be a great individual, if you like, who controls his whole being with good habits, etc., and directs his inner self well, thoroughly well. St. Francis of Assisi would be a great person. Maybe John Paul II, a great person. Maybe Benedict XVI, a great person. What about Obama?
He's got a long way to go.
So, great, you notice I didn't make any comment, great persons usually have their whole being in order. The intellect doing what it ought to do, the will doing what it ought to do. Built up with great habits, virtues, etc., etc. So there's a great difference between the individual and the person. Let me put on the board some of those differences now. Woodbury wrote a beautiful thing which he gave out one night, The Foundations of Political Authority, and showed the difference between individuality and personality in society. So here's Bob. He's an individual, he's a person, or he's an individual. See, kangaroos are only individuals. Dogs are only individuals. Man is an individual, that is to say, an undivided one. If you divide him any further, he's no longer man. Try it sometime, cut somebody in halves, and you'll see he's no longer a man. So it's the lowest that can be. But, Elizabeth finds that funny, but that's an individual. Now the basis of that is matter. And the basis of personality is spirit. Why did I do that? That's wrong. So spirit is the basis of his personality. Now as an individual, he's merely a part of society. As a person, he's a whole. He exists not just for society, but he exists for his own sake. As a part, the government can order him to war. The government can order him even to risk his life. I don't say they could order him to death. No, can't do that. I mean, unless I'm not talking about capital punishment now, I'm talking about just the government can't say go and die for the country, but they can say go and risk your life for the country. But the whole, as a whole, society exists for him. So here, apart, he exists for society, and as a whole, society exists for him. Politicians don't know these things. I received a beautiful thing, which I thought I had put in here, as a matter of fact. No, but I haven't. I think it was Dr. Bonnet sent me something about things that lawyers have said in society, in court. Did I send that to you? Yeah.
Wow.
And it said, don't overlook the fact that most of government is run by lawyers. Yeah. But they know nothing about these things. When Father Woodbury gave a lecture in Sydney, which is magnificent, The Foundations of Political Authority, he was selling copies of this later for 25 cents. You can have it for nothing if you can get it off the, well, you try and arrange to put it on the computer for you. But The Foundations of Political Theory, I modified it a bit because he used figures and things which don't apply today. And but he brought all this out. The place was packed that night. I'll never forget that public lecture. He gave a periodic public lecture, something I want to do here too, a periodical public lecture, which I urge you to bring friends to. And there were politicians there, state government, and federal, I don't think any federal government, but local government. Federal government was too far away, Canberra, a couple of 100 miles from Sydney. But the society, politicians should realise this, that the individual exists for society, but as a person, society exists for him. Now that makes political theory much more complex. For dogs, it's easy. They're all parts, just merely parts. It's very easy. I remember on one occasion, there's a bull calf, was magnificent. And here's a first-class cattle judge, Father Woodbury, looking at this and he almost cried. A bad-tempered Irish gardener had hit the thing on the head with the point of a shovel and had cracked its skull. And it's on the ground shuddering, because it got onto his garden or something or other. The thing is shuddering, dying. And he had to say to Joe, the farmhand, put a bullet in it, Joe. Well, you could do that with a calf. But what if it's a child? I remember in Montreal, there was a child, something had happened, I can't remember what happened to it, but they had ambulance and police and helicopters operating to get that child to the children's hospital in Montreal. A tremendous outburst of approval for what the men did to try and save that child's life. One tiny scratch and the child is looked after. With a bull calf, which would have been a champion bull, by the way, it was just put a bullet into it because it's so badly damaged. But we'd never say a child is badly damaged. Try and save it. So there's a big difference. The differences are enormous. For instance, because of this, a government has an obligation to make sure that there's a healthy religious opinion in society. Something that governments here would reject. They already reject it. Oh, separation of church and state. Whatever in the name of God that meant. Understood it meant the government shouldn't found a religion, like the Church of England, for instance. It shouldn't found a religion. But to abolish religion or to put a gulf in the way of the people, certainly not. Doesn't mean that, as you know as well as I do, probably better than I do. So all these things, the individual person has a right to education. But the person, that is, not as an individual you don't educate people, but as persons you do. All the consequences of this are drawn out in this article. It's a beautiful article. It's all the logic is drawn out enormously, and what the consequences are with government. All justice is commutative justice, etc. That's how it goes when man's just considered an individual. He brings the whole logic of that out with regard to religion and everything else. So it makes an enormous difference. In a way, the high point of our study was man, the spirituality of the human intellect. And remember what we said about that. Man sees this as useful, that as pleasurable, that is limited for this, that is useful for that. But nothing is perfect. Result is, we don't have to take this or have to take that. Joe might say, oh, I'd love a beer today, but I don't think I'll have it. I'll have something. I'll go out and drive somewhere and see Fifi. I don't want to have that beer today. I don't want to be picked up for driving under the influence. So the foundation of rights is that spirituality. But we never hear that. We never hear about that. It's always, I've got a right for this, a right for that. Nobody seems to challenge those people when they say a woman has a right to an abortion. Where did she get that right from? A girl on campus once said, I remember this very well, two girls. One introduced her friend to me who I didn't know. One had been my student. She said something about she'd been studying so-and-so, and she said, and rights, etc. And I said, was that a right? Yes, I have a right to that, whatever it was, I can't remember. And I said, what is a right? What I want. Ooh, so if that lad wants something, he can have it, eh? That's, you know what I'm referring to. He said, that's all right. The other girl turned to him and said, you did say that. What you want is a right. But it doesn't come from will, it comes from nature, rights do. Not from what you want, but from what you ought to want. And what you ought to want is discovered by human nature.
Adequately understood.
Good, adequately understood. Based upon man, and adequately understood means knowing him as a spiritual, a materialized or a hylomorphic being, spirit and matter. So that has an enormous effect in political theory. Rights are founded upon that. Human nature adequately understood. So this right to this, right to that, we're hearing this all the time. They never mention obligations, but the first foundation of right is an obligation. Mr. and Mrs. Vanari have 3 children. Now, that puts an obligation on them to educate those children. I don't mean to say that puts an obligation on them to get them all doctorates in universities somewhere. but to educate them according to their capacity, etc., etc. Educate them as far as they can. But the best education, of course, is taking place in the home. You saw that tonight. The best education takes place in the home. The parents are the ones who have the authority to educate, by the way. Creyson and D'Agostino have published works. We've published 3 books. And in there, I was very honoured to hear that they regarded my article, The Philosophy of Education, as the most important article in the book. And this was on education, defending the rights of parents to educate. I gave, I think, 5 arguments where parents alone have the right to educate, not the state. Well, it's all founded upon the parental relationship with those spiritual souls that they are trying to educate. And the government hasn't got the authority to take that over. Woodbury put it this way: when the government starts an educational system, like we had in Australia, a state educational system started up, and within as quickly a time as possible, they've got them going. Then what they should be doing is slowly but surely moving towards handing them over to the parents. Not retaining them, but handing them over. It's the parents' job to educate. And the parents could set up their own school boards, etc. But to oblige what we've got in this society here now, namely that you are obliged to pay for that. What did I pay last year? $1,500 or something for Newport here? That's a tremendous, shall I call it, totalitarian seizure of education. The parents alone have the right to do that, and they should set up their schools. And if you don't want, but what the parents are forced to do here is to supply them, pay them, and then go and pay for their own schooling elsewhere. Or they could come to this if they were, no, that's not the point. They shouldn't have to come there to that one. They should be free to set up and decide what education they're going to give their own children. It's a terrible usurpation of rights. And it's worse here than a lot of places. In Australia, at least, the government gives vouchers. And Sir Henry Parkes, who set up the education system, Dr. Rumble, a famous radio priest who broadcast weekly, you know of Dr. Rumble? Yes, he's well known in the United States, or was. He broadcast here for a time. I met him once. He was a Protestant minister who became a Catholic priest, and he set out to, with a radio session every Sunday night, he would answer questions. And boy, he got some rude questions, and he very neatly handed it back in a very delicate but kind way. He gave it straight back. And he was a good man. But he investigated, Sir Henry Parkes, what he did. He didn't intend the educational system in Australia to stay permanently in the state's hands. It was only to start it up, then hand it over to the parents. But the state, once it's got its hand into it, hangs on to it. That's exactly what Hitler did, Mussolini, Stalin, they all did that. Seizure of the educational system. And you get this sort of silly stuff. In Moscow, for instance, I remember this one. 2 plants on Friday afternoon will be put on the desk there. Now, this one is going to be watered by the state. This one will leave that to God. It'd come in Monday, and of course the one by God was all dried up. It hadn't been watered anyway. And then the other one, they watered it over the weekend. And the state's one stayed alive, but the other one didn't. So there's no God. That's suited to the mind of a little child. So, but the education system is in the hands of the parents. They love the child the most. They have started the generative procedure, etc., etc. They know the child the best. What can be done by the lower ought not to be done by the higher. That's the principle of subsidiarity. There are about 5 arguments I've ironed out for the education rights of parents. And Father Woodbury drew up a beautiful thing on that, and he was kicked out of a Catholic teachers' college for teaching it. That's rather typical. I'm afraid I've found that sort of thing in many places. Suddenly your own will turn against you and you don't know why. I live about What? It's exactly half a mile from my garage to this front door. They've got a code of ethics here. They've got no ethician on the code on the board. I've established that. No ethician. Yet they're dealing with ethics. I've never been asked to give any help at all. In fact, while I was in hospital, I confronted a hostile nun who wanted to get me to sign a... what was it, Bill? Can you... Pardon? A proxy, yeah.
But he had one.
Yeah, I know. Well, that came after.
Oh.
Thanks to you and the help you gave me, and I fixed one. But she was talking down to me as if you wouldn't know about these things. Yeah. And I said, sister, what I see, I will not sign. I've advised others not to, in my capacity as a professor of ethics. And I've denied others, or urged others not to. Oh, she was incensed by that. You could see her. She didn't come back to see me. She wanted to. Said she was going to. But I don't know what her name was, Bill. The ignorance that's abroad in government circles and in hospital circles, at every other place. So ethics is detailed, worked out in great detail, based upon this, that man is a complex individual. He is both material, has a body, and he has a spiritual soul. In other words, he's a person and an individual. And that brings a great complexity into his life. And if the good Lord's willing, and I'm on my 2 feet, we'll start that sometime in the fall, ethics again. It's a couple of years since we dealt with that. By the way, I want to mention this. I did overhaul the philosophical psychology while in the hospital. I did overhaul it, and I'm very pleased with what we've got now. I've ironed out lots of things. Where things needed to be explained a little more, I explain them. It'll throw everybody's notes out, unfortunately, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter that much. But for those people, particularly distant learning people who are maybe reading this in the darkest Africa, or in north of Ireland, or Great Britain, England, where Mr. Benari's been sending the metaphysics course. Well, we want to... I wanted this to be perfect, and as perfect as possible. It's nothing like Father Woodbury's text. So, ethics depends upon metaphysics, which establishes the end for which man exists, God, and the beginning. Ethics depends upon this, that man is by nature a spiritual animal. He's got a spiritual soul. And that it's independent of the matter, ultimately. It's what's called a substance, but not a complete substance. It needs the body. That's why there'll be a resurrection in which we probably all will reappear at the age of about what we were at about 30 years of age, as has been suggested by some theologians, after death. That's supposed to be when we look our best. I remember saying this in Ottawa, and a woman called out, "Couldn't you make that 40?" She says.
78.
I think of what I did say at the time about, I said, a woman comes to her most beautiful at 30, that was what it was, and she said, "Couldn't you make that 40? A French-Canadian woman. So, my friends, man is an individual and a person, and as a result of that, it affects the foundation of political theory. Now, it also affects it in the order of economics. Enormous difference in economics, because we are not only an individual, but we're a person. So we are by nature owners. Therefore, we have rights to property, but that, at least the right to look for property. We may not want to acquire property, but we have at least the ability to acquire it, or the aptitude to acquire it if we want to. That is why ownership by all the members of the company is far superior. What are they calling it? The Centre for Economic and Social Justice. The third way, they call it. The homesteading, they call it. I don't like it. It's too confusing the way they express it. But we used to just say man has a right to ownership, or at least share ownership. Well, when we're studying ethics, we see there are different kinds of ownership. First, by nature, man is an individual owner. Secondly, you can't, for instance, you might run a hospital. One man wouldn't own the hospital or couldn't run a hospital. You'd need a few people there. Share ownership. And thirdly, last, by the way, is state ownership. Absolutely last. But thirdly, it may be that you have what's called the capitalistic method, namely one man owning it or a group owning it and all the rest workers for them. There's nothing intrinsically evil about that, but it is far superior if they're all owners. And that's been proven in Canada and Australia and the United States. And I believe in places like France. I think in France now, private ownership is spreading so rapidly, and share ownership, that it's making an enormous difference to the French economic system. The trouble is, every economic system at the moment is suffering from the general malaise of the whole world economy. So, I think if we keep these things in mind, the importance of what we're doing sometimes doesn't readily appear to us. But the government has no aptitude very often for ownership or for understanding these things. You've got groups running the government who are lawyers. That's their problem, and they're not. I apologise to retired lawyers who are present, and that their trouble is they're not educated to understand these things. They receive the training as a lawyer, like we received a training as a pharmacist when I was back long ago, but that doesn't give me the education to understand all these things. I remember one man who was a pharmacist arguing with me over state ownership of pharmacy, and he was urging for that, socialism. That's the last card in the pack, the last. The state is not a person, but in the totalitarian system or state absolutism, the state is regarded as the only person. We're all individuals. And that's a terrible system. All of that's brought out in this thing here. Then such things as inheritance and how can a government make laws? How can the government today make laws that people tomorrow have to obey, etc.? Woodbury deals adequately with that. But no political theorist usually can answer that question. How can we oblige people tomorrow to obey laws that were made today? Woodbury answers that. So I think my friends will call a halt to that if you don't mind. I think I've done as much as I can.